Bueno, otra vez, otra vez. ¿Qué está pasando ahí?
During the 1980s, Peru was hit with a disastrous economic crisis known as the Lost Decade. Human rights violations were deeply intensified. Peru faced significant political instability and was facing a deep recession. The country was marked by mass poverty, inequality, and lack of basic necessities, impacting the population particularly in rural areas. This would make it easier for people in rural areas to join rebellions like the Shining Path.
The Shining Path, a guerrilla group founded and led by Abimael Guzman, took advantage of these issues and launched a violent rebellion against the government. Many Peruvians from rural areas had joined the Shining Path as they were hit the hardest by poverty during the lost decade. Rural Peruvians felt neglected and mistreated by the government, leading them to feel angry and to support the Shining Path as they had promised to stand up for the poor. The conflict worsened, with both the Shining Path and the Peruvian government committing human rights violations, hurting the nation's economic and social state, and left a lasting impact on Peru.
During this time, human rights were violated in many ways, mostly financially, but also their safety and their freedom of beliefs due to the Shining Path. The Shining Path used dangerous tactics to instill fear and control over the people in order to overthrow the government and establish a communist state. These tactics included massacres, assassinations, and bombings towards politicians and civilians. One particular incident was the 1992 Tarata bombing in the capital city, Lima, where the Shining Path set off car bombs in a residential area, killing 25 people and injuring over 150. The bombing, intended to disrupt and destabilize the city, portrayed that the group was willing to harm innocent lives to fulfill their own political vision.
As a result, the Peruvian government created a campaign against the Shining Path's rebellion that often disregarded human rights, as well as increasing their militarization. Military forces carried out unauthorized killings, enforced disappearances, and tortured detainees, constantly targeting civilians they suspected of helping the Shining Path. This was mostly done in quote-unquote emergency zones, areas where the government declared a state of emergency due to the conflict with the Shining Path, granting authority broad powers to maintain control. In these areas, authority often suspended certain civil rights and due process protections. They could detain individuals without warrants, and people were frequently suspected of aiding the Shining Path without evidence, dismissing their rights. Abimael Guzman was the founder/leader of the organization called the Shining Path. The way Guzman ran his organization was very strict, as well as you were required to sign an oath of loyalty to not just the Shining Path, but to Comrade Gonzalo. This was the alias that Abimael Guzman decided to give himself. As the group grew more in members and power, his followers started to call him the Fourth Sword after Marx, Lenin, and Mao. Guzman had the ability to inspire his comrades to be completely devoted to him and the Shining Path, which was a big part in the Shining Path's success.
Alan Garcia led Peru from 1985 to 1990, during a time of severe economic decline and increasing violence from the Shining Path. His efforts at counter-rebellion measures, but these were often poorly managed and led to significant human rights abuses, including massacres of suspected rebels in prisons. Garcia's term highlights the government's struggle to control the Shining Path while failing to protect human rights, a legacy that influenced the more intense crackdown under Fujimori.
Alberto Fujimori, who served as Peru's president from 1990 to 2000, played a controversial role during the country's fight against the Shining Path. His administration took an extreme approach, causing a military-led enforcement that captured key leaders of the Shining Path and significantly reduced the group's violence. However, this aggressive strategy also caused severe human rights abuses, including illegal killings, forced disappearances, and torture of suspected rebels. Fujimori was later charged for these abuses along with corruption and was convicted for human rights violations.
The U.S. State Department classified the Shining Path as a terrorist group. In the 1970s and 1980s, the U.S. supported Peru by providing loans and military aid to help fight against the insurgency. In 1990, the U.S. as well as other Andean nations signed the Cartagena Agreement to strengthen economic and military supports for counterinsurgency and anti-narcotics efforts. However, in 1991, the Americas Watch Committee, part of the Human Rights Watch, raised concerns about human rights abuse. They urged the U.S. to stop military aid to Peru unless it improved its treatment of detainees, stopped targeting journalists and human rights groups, and ended political assassinations. The report warned that U.S. aid could then be linked to murders, abductions, and torture.
The Shining Path had left a lasting impact on Peru. The group's violent actions led to thousands of deaths and displacement. Due to the violence and failing economy, many Peruvians had emigrated, leaving a large impact on Peru's population. Even after the last decade, many Peruvians continue leaving as the effects hit hard. While the organization no longer poses a major threat, remnants of the group continue to be involved in drug trafficking and violence in remote regions. The conflict also left deep social and economic scars, with many communities still struggling with the legacy of both the insurgents' actions and the government's brutal countermeasures. Ultimately, both the Shining Path and the government left thousands of innocent people dead, leading to the formation of Peru's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which aimed to document these abuses and acknowledge the suffering of those affected.
I did not live in Lima. I grew up in Callao. We didn't have to deal with the car bombings that was going on in Lima. But I remember one situation when we were at home with my grandmothers, that we were all sleeping, we were little kids, and everything shook. Because we had the water supply station very close to us. And they had put a car bomb. So our windows shattered. We were so scared, and that was it. We did not have water for the whole day, so that was tough. What changed was an everyday life, since they were having the car bombs and we did not have electricity. And they were rationing the electricity by cutting our electricity. I remember growing up doing my homework under candlelight. And that's how I grew up for a couple of years. I think it was very ironic for the Shining Path to think they were doing this for the people, but they were actually hurting the people.
Ya pasó, pero todavía queda en algo el por qué querían hacer un cambio. Los que querían hacer esa guerra civil, los que querían tomar el poder. El Perú tenía que cambiar, sea como sea con Sendero, sea con Fujimori. Ya esos son los dos opuestos. Entonces el otro opuesto ganó y de todas maneras el Perú está cambiando. Y hacia allá vamos, hacia un cambio total. Alan García era parte de los intereses, él trabajaba con los intereses antiguos, fue muy violento en ese problema, no hizo buen trabajo. Él prácticamente aceleró la crisis del país, tanto económico, social, político, lo aceleró, por eso que la guerra se puso más fuerte y Fujimori agarró y lo cambió todo.